Let's everybody get a blue hymnal and turn to page 250. 250. Good evening. It's good to have everybody here with us tonight. Good to see this good number in God's house. Thankful that we're able to gather one more time this side of heaven and everybody be here. And looking forward to a study this evening. And by way of announcements, do remember the soup and sandwich should be taking place the second Sunday in February for the Ladies Fellowship. Also, Backpack Pals, bring them by February the 4th, and that would be this coming up Sunday. So make sure that you have everything here for those. You can put them down there in the fellowship hall on the counter. Also, announcement/prayer request. There will be no service for Brother Martin Staley. The family's going to do a graveside service February the 10th. So no funeral home, no nothing like that. So there'll be we'll be doing fresh refreshments for them afterwards because it'll be down here in the church cemetery. So put that on your calendars, February the 10th. Unless something changes, that's what Miss Ruth told me yesterday. So make plans for that so we can support them and their family. And also pray for the Staley family. I know it's went by and seen Miss Annie and Danny and Ruth on Monday. And she says, well, I know where he's at. I said, well, that's the main thing. So she was encouraged in that. But, of course, it's sad to, she's just turned 93. You would think that it would be the opposite. But, she hates to bury one of her youngest, but at least she knows where he's at. So do pray for them. I know they're taking it kind of rough. So pray for them this evening as well. Also, continue to remember Mama. She had her eye operated on. Everything went good there. So she's in recovery at home. She said she wouldn't be watching, but she'd be listening this evening. So we're praying for you, Mama, as you get better, and hopefully you'll be back here with us Sunday. I told y'all it was a season of cataracts. Brother Marvin said he's waiting to see how everybody else does before he gets his done. So if anybody's wanting guinea pigs, Miss Geraldine's done fabulous. We'll see how Mama makes out, but go ahead and schedule them. It's a good season. Also, remember the Cheek family. That is the lunch lady up at Fayetteville Street where the boys go to school. Her husband passed away suddenly yesterday evening. So do remember her, and a sweet lady, and remember that family. Also, continue to remember the Harvilles, that everybody recovering there. Everybody's good to go there. So we're going to scratch y'all off the list until next time. Hopefully it'll be a long time, right, Miss Nikki? Also, it's good to have Brother Marvin and Miss Mary back. Continue to remember them as they recover from their sickness. Also remember Miss Diane and Brother Timmy and them as they look after her. Continue to remember Wayne and Gail and their son Ronald. Seth Lucas is battling cancer. Brother Jim and Miss Pat, continue to remember them. Remember Desiree's grandpa and grandma. Continue to pray for our church and our deacons. Did you talk to Brother Vernon today? I don't know. He must be sick, or Miss Carolyn. So do remember them this evening. And also remember Clayton Smith, Miss Edna's grandson, Miss Linda's sister down in Georgia, and they'll be traveling down there here in a couple weeks. So do be much in prayer for them. Also remember Jeremiah's dad, Miss Sonia Poole. Brother Keith Mabe that'll have his hip replaced. Good to have Brother Larry with us. Everything went well with his procedure. Doctors told him to take it easy, so he's no heavy lifting, no busting wood or nothing like that for a couple of days anyhow. So it's good to have him back with us. And also continue to remember my serviceman, Brother Darrell Ritter. He had a blood clot, and then I think they found out he's got some heart issues as well that they're looking into. So do pray for him. He's a healthy man, but he's got issues. So it gives me some relief to know that I'm big old fatty, and it don't matter whether you're healthy or big, people still have problems. But do pray for him and all that he's got coming up. Is there any other outspoken prayer requests, Miss Nikki? Let's remember this lady that's had some health issues. Miss Doris. Remember he's having a colonoscopy done today. All right, let's remember Brother Jerry's having a colonoscopy done this coming up Monday. Also, I don't see Miss Norma here. Pray for her. I know she, when she said blood pressure, I think of her. She struggles with her blood pressure from time to time. So do remember Miss Norma. Any other outspoken prayer requests this evening before we go to the Lord in word of prayer? Get my calendar right here where I know that I'm telling you all the right dates. Start praying for our spring revival. It will be May the 13th, 14th, and 15th. I'm working on the 16th and 17th, but if not, we know we'll have it for those 3 days. Brother Jody Harrison will be down here with us those 3 nights, and working on somebody for the last 2, but if not, we'll just have a 3-night service. But do mark that on your calendars. I know people will start planning vacations and getaways and different things, but go ahead and put that down so that way you won't plan something in advance, and you can go ahead and make arrangements for that. But it'll be May the 13th, 14th, and 15th here at New Center. But if there's no other outspoken prayer requests this evening, let's all that are willing, let's gather around the altar and go to the Lord in a word of prayer and talk to the one that can make a difference in all these issues. Tell you what, Brother Jamie, Lord, our Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you, Lord, for this day. Lord, we thank you, Lord, for a good time together in your house, Lord. Lord, I thank you, Lord, for the way you looked after us, Lord, this week, Lord. Since Sunday, Lord, I thank you, Lord, for getting me up this morning, Lord. Lord, I know I couldn't have done it without you, Lord. Lord, I thank you, Lord, for the way that you have worked in our church, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for the good spirit that we feel, Lord. I pray, Lord, for all the requests that's been mentioned, Lord, for the ones that are sick, Lord, for the ones that have uncertain things coming up, Lord.
So everybody get a blue hymnal and turn to page 51.
Brother, we was getting ready to send a search party out for you. If you got your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 6 this evening. Luke chapter 6. Going to do a study tonight on the 12 disciples. Seems like me and the teen class have been going over the disciples for the last little bit. I asked what we always do a review question at the beginning. What did we talk about last week? Lane's answer for the last 2 months, 3 months seemed like we've talked about the disciples. So I looked this evening, got to thinking, and that's seemed like that's the way the Lord wanted me to go. There's some of you may know everything there is to know about the disciples, but there's things I found this evening I didn't know, and how they all of them died a martyr's death, and or the majority of them did anyhow, but they was just willing to serve, and that's, as Christians, that's the way that we should be willing to do. God called them, and they went. They didn't give excuses. They didn't start saying, well, Lord, I've got this boat down here that's going to need some nets mended and some things to do. And Matthew didn't say, well, you know what, there's taxes to be collected. I'm just going to hang by the gate. No, he got up and went with Jesus, and that's what we need to do in our life. We need just to get up and go with him. We don't need to worry about whatever else is going on, and that stuff will take care of itself. As long as you put in God first, the rest of it doesn't matter. And I know we have to work, we have to do things of that in this life, and I understand that. But everything in our life should revolve around God. It shouldn't revolve around. He shouldn't be that little planet out there by itself that's revolving around us. We should revolve our life around Him. But looking in Luke chapter 6 tonight, we'll read verse 12 through 16. And it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles. Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot, which was also the traitor. You know, that was a motley crew that Jesus threw together. You know, it wasn't a crowd that come off of church pews. It wasn't a crowd. He didn't go into the synagogue and call these men. He called some of them down by the seashore. He called some of them by the gate collecting taxes. And one of them was the devil from the beginning. We all have issues in our life. Jesus had issues when he started out with that crowd. But he knew what he was getting into when he started. And he just went on because he knew what he was here to do. He didn't get sidetracked. He didn't get sideways because of the ones that he chose. I mean, well, the first one on my list tonight is Peter. His name was Simon Peter, or Cephas. Also meant rock. His parents were Jonah. His early life, he lived in Bethsaida, later Capernaum. He was a fisherman by trade. He wrote 1st and 2nd Peter. Peter also may have had ministered in the province of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, perhaps in Corinth, and finally in Rome. And Peter's death, according to tradition, arrested by Tertullus and Origen. Peter was crucified with his head downwards in Rome, and the date of his death is likely between AD 64 and 68. So Peter gave his life for the Lord. Peter was called down by the seashore. We all know that Peter was the one that walked on water. Some give Peter a hard time for the stuff that he said in his ministry and how some of the answers that he gave Jesus when he asked him stuff. But Peter was the only one that had faith to get out of the boat. They saw Jesus coming towards them in the boat, and Peter said, "Can I come out to you?" I'm paraphrasing, and Jesus said, "Yeah, come on." But you know what happened to Peter? He lost sight of the Lord. He got his eyes off the Lord, and because of that, he started to sink. And just like you in your Christian life, when you get your eyes off Jesus, don't be surprised if you start sinking. If he starts going in and out from behind the waves, and you can't see which way to head, but you always look up, because that's where he's going to be at. He's going to be right there in front of you. But Peter was the one that walked on water. You know, we talked about this here a couple of weeks ago on a Wednesday night. He caught all the fish that about sank the boat. You know, Peter had got out. He'd been fishing all day. And then Jesus told him, said, "How about let's cast it off, make a draw. Let's see what's out here." And you know, I'm sure that I ain't going to preach that message again, but I'm sure Peter, all the thoughts that went through his mind, said, "Lord, we've been doing this same thing." I don't know whether you've ever had to be that way in your Christian life, where it feels like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you're looking for results, but it never happens. We're praying a prayer, "God, save that person. God, do this for that person. God, make a change in that person's life," and it just doesn't happen. But we got to keep on. When God tells you to do something, you keep being faithful. Peter was faithful in that instance. Peter was also his mother-in-law was the one that was healed there, and several was able to see that. And he was one of the ones on the Mount of Transfiguration. he witnessed some of the highlights of Jesus' earthly ministry because he was in that inner circle. There's going to be two more that we're going to talk about here in a minute that was also in that inner circle. But if you put forth the effort, God will show you things that other people don't get to see. You'll get to experience stuff in your life that other people won't get to experience because they don't put the time in. They don't have the faith that Peter and James and John did. Those men were willing to go a little extra mile with Jesus, and because of that, they was able to see more than the other crowd did. Not because there was anything special about them, but just because they was willing to go the extra mile. I mean, some of this other crowd may have been just as willing, but God chose these three men to do mighty things, for them to be able to see mighty things. But he was on the Mount of Transfiguration, and one of the most famous things that people remember about Peter was that he denied Jesus. He was there the night of the crucifixion, or the night that he was arrested and the day before the crucifixion, and Peter went along with them, went along with the mob and the crowd, and was there, and there was several of them that said, "Hey, you're one of the ones. You're one of his apostles. You're one of his disciples." And Peter said, "No, that's not me. Y'all got me mistaken for somebody else." But then before the cock crew, you know the story, how Peter was reminded of those words that Jesus told him. So many times we get caught up with things that's going on in this life. And maybe not necessarily we deny God like Peter did, but we get to that same situation. We start saying, "Well, no, that's not me." You know, hey, you start putting on a different face. You start being that one of the hypocrite too many times. And we don't need to be that way as God's people. What people see of us in here, they ought to see of us out in the world. And Peter was just trying to get away from being arrested himself. He was probably scared to death. He was seeing what they was doing to Jesus and how they was treating him. And he said, I love him, but I don't want to go down that same road. But then later on, he was crucified the same way, but except upside down. Peter was also known as the spokesman of the group. That may be a good thing and it may be a bad thing. Sometimes Peter spoke before he thought. I have instances in my life where I speak before I think sometimes, especially when I get nervous or something like that. Maybe that's what Peter's problem was. Maybe he was a little nervous, little fella, and when Jesus called on him, he just spoke whatever was right there at the tip of his tongue. But we need to think about what we say. We need to take time to think about that and to give the correct answer, because this world's looking at us. They're looking at us under microscopes that would make NASA stuff look like puny little things, because people's wanting to see you fall as a Christian. They're wanting to give any kind of reason to say, you know what, if that's what a Christian is, why in the world would I want to be like that? I'm sure that there was some that looked at Peter's life and said, well, you know what, Jesus called him and he denied him, and why would I want to be like that? Some was probably there when he spoke out of turn and said some of the things that he did. You know, Jesus told him that one time, said, "Satan, get behind me," when Peter give his answer. But Jesus still loved him, and he was still able to use him. He didn't throw him away. Can you imagine the night that all that went on with Peter and he denied Jesus? What was going through his mind? I'm done. I can't be used no more. My life's over. I mean, I've just give up 3.5 years of my life to a man that I would have done anything for, and I denied him. And he knew that I was going to deny him. And Jesus even, I think there was one account where Jesus was able to see Peter, and when the cock crew, he looked at him. And to know that he looked at him and knew what was going on, the hurt that was probably going through his heart, thinking, I'll never be able to fellowship with these men again. I'll never be able to go out with that crowd again and do anything. But Jesus wasn't bitter at him. He just welcomed him back in. He's the same way today. I don't know what you've done or what's going on in your life and what you think you can't get past, but God's big enough to take you out of that. God's big enough to fix that, dust you off, and put you back on the right road. Peter was able to write 1st and 2nd Peter. He'd come back. He didn't quit his ministry. God didn't get done with him then. He didn't put him on the shelf, and he still used him. But we could all take some lessons from what Peter did in his life, good and bad. It wasn't all bad. You know, I've heard many people run Peter down before. But Peter's no different than us. Many times we get sideways with God. Something bad happens. Something happens just out of the ordinary, and we say, God, why did you do that? Why did you do that to my family? Why are you making my family go through this? Why not somebody else? Why not somebody else that's not serving you, that doesn't care about you? God's using that for an example. God's using us to test us through the fire. And we never know who's looking at us, who's looking at our lives, to see whether or not we're going to crumble under the pressure. I've thought many days about quitting, just giving up. But then you go to thinking about who's watching. Who's going to watch me throw in the towel? Who's going to watch me quit and give up? It ain't worth it. It's not worth it for you to quit. We got to keep pressing towards the mark. Peter didn't quit. He may have got knocked down a couple of times, but he kept on going. Next, we're going to look at Andrew. Andrew was Peter's brother. That was about the only thing that I could find. He was one of the quieter ones, I guess. There wasn't a lot to tell about Andrew, but his early life was in Bethsaida like Peter was. He was a fisherman. His work was uncertain, but tradition says he ministered in Cappadocia, Galatia, Bethany, later in the Scythian desert, and Byzantium, and finally in Thrace, Macedonia, Thessaly, and Achaia. So Andrew, there wasn't a lot said about him in the Bible as far as his works, but he still went out and ministered. He still went out and done what God called him to do and what Jesus had asked him to do. And many times we want to see our name in lights. We want something to be said about us. When we leave here, we say, oh, I want people to tell a big story about me and tell how I done this and all my accomplishments. As far as looking through the Bible, Andrew's accomplishments wasn't a whole lot listed, but he was listed as one of Jesus' 12 disciples, and that's a big honor to be just one of 12. Whether he done many great works, whether he walked on water like Peter, his brother, or whether he was just there and just being faithful. Sometimes that's what God calls us to do, is just be faithful, and we've got to continue to do that. Thirdly, tonight we're going to look at James the Greater, the son of Zebedee. At first when I read that, I thought, why did they call him James the Greater? But there was another James, that he was called the Lesser, because he was younger or smaller. But James the Greater, or the Elder, his surname was Boanerges, or Sons of Thunder. His parents were Zebedee and Salome. His home was Bethsaida, Capernaum, and Jerusalem. He was a fisherman by trade. He preached in Jerusalem and Judea, and his death was he was beheaded by Herod in AD 62 or 66 in Jerusalem. So he didn't live much longer than Peter did. But what he done for the Lord. He was the older brother of John, was in Jesus' inner circle with Peter and John. And he was the one that asked Jesus if he could rule next to Jesus when they got to heaven. He said, "If you got a place for me and my brother." At least he was looking out for his brother, his little brother. He wanted John to have a spot too. But that's not the way. Jesus explained to him that wasn't the way it was going to happen. But so many today want to have they had that same mindset as James. They want to be recognized. They want to, when they get the glory, for everybody to look at them. No, I want everybody to look at what the crowns I had that I'm going to give to the Lord, not for what I've done, but what I can give back to Him, what He's done for me. And that's the way people should look at your life. They should see God. They shouldn't see Bradley. They shouldn't see Desiree. They shouldn't see anybody else. They should see God, because I've not accomplished anything in this life. People look at me and say, "Well, you've done all right for yourself." No, God's done all right for me. He's the one that's took care of me. He's the one that's given me what I've got. And if it wasn't for Him, I wouldn't have nothing. In the world's eyes, I still have nothing, but I've got Him. And that's all that matters. If the world sees that in you, they've seen it all. It doesn't matter what you got in the bank. It doesn't matter how big a house you got. It doesn't matter what kind of car you drive or what kind of job you have. It matters what you do for Him. And James, he got that a little bit wrong, but Jesus corrected him and said, "All right." He said, "That ain't the way this is going to work. You're not going to be ruling there with me, or you're not going to have that spot." But he got a little ahead of himself. Fourthly, tonight we're going to talk about John.
John, the beloved disciple, his surname was Boanerges, or sons of thunder. Zebedee and Salome was his parents. Same thing as James. He was a fisherman. He wrote the Gospel of John, the 3 epistles, and Revelations. He labored among the church of Asia Minor, especially in Ephesus. And his death was he was banished to Patmos, A.D. 95, recalled, died a natural death. So John was the only one. I think there was one more that it talks about. It could have been a natural death, but still, yet he was exiled to the Isle of Patmos. He was boiled in oil. It wasn't like John got by with just nothing. It wasn't like he was the only one that got by escape-free. No, he went through troubles in his life as well. He went through persecutions. John was also one of those ones that was in the inner circle. He was always close to Jesus. He was there at the Lord's Supper with his head on Jesus' bosom. That's how close John wanted to be. He wanted to be right there at him. He didn't want to have to know where. He didn't want to have to get far away from him. He didn't want to be over here in the corner talking about something else, or seeing what Peter was doing, or seeing what Thaddeus or some of that other crowd had going on. No, he was there because of Jesus. He wanted to be close to the one that had called him, the one that they was all about, the one that they was supposed to be serving. He was referred to a lot, or he referred to himself this way as the one that Jesus loved. He was given the duty of taking care of Mary, the mother of Jesus. When Jesus was dying on the cross, he said, "John, behold thy mother." I heard Brother Alan Kirk preach a message how John was put into the nursing home ministry. All the others got different kinds of tasks, and Peter he went out and preached and done all that he done, and Jesus gave John his mother and said, "You take care of Mama," when he left. I forget all of his points. It was a good message. People, you're laughing now, but if I could find it, I'd give you the link to go back and listen to it. But it was a powerful message how that when somebody leaves you in charge of taking care of their mama or daddy, that's a pretty big responsibility, and especially when it was Jesus. When Jesus said, "John, thy mother, take care of her." It don't get much more special than that. That's how much Jesus thought of John. He knew that John would look after her. He knew that John had a servant's heart. He knew that he was there close to him. He knew probably what she liked, what she didn't like, and he knew that she was in good hands by leaving Mary with John when he left this earth. Was shown all that took place in Revelations. He was able to see the end. You know, I can't imagine the things that John saw. You know, we've talked about this here before of how, John was living in olden times. And John seen what's going to happen in now times. So can you imagine what went through John's mind after he's seen all the technology and stuff that he's seen, and to see how this world's going to end, and how there's going to be the Battle of Armageddon, and all the stuff that John saw? I couldn't imagine fathoming it. That's why when you read Revelations, a lot of times the way he describes it, it's like, what's he talking about? But then you go to look and you go to thinking, it could be this stuff that he's talking about. But John was able to see how it's going to end. Next, we're going to talk about James. James the Less, that is, son of Alphaeus. His parents was Alphaeus and Mary. He lived in Galilee. His ministry or work was he preached in Judea and in Egypt. His death was according to tradition. He was martyred in Egypt. Could have been a brother to Matthew. Mark chapter 2, verse 14 kind of gives us a little bit of insight of that. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of customs, and said unto him, "Follow me." And he arose and followed him. Now, I'm not saying that he necessarily was the son of James, but that was one of the commentaries I read. It's not going to make or break us. That one's not. Whether he was his brother or not, all I know is he was one of the 12. But that was a little nugget I thought, well, it could have very well been, because Levi's daddy was Alphaeus as well. But James the Less. Next, we're going to talk about Judas, not Iscariot, or also known as Thaddeus. His same name is Thaddeus, and Lebus. His parents was James. He lived in Galilee. He preached in Mesopotamia and Armenia, was martyred in what is now Iran, and buried near Tiberias. Can you imagine being also known as Judas during that time? Every conversation I'm sure that followed after Jesus' death started out was, I wasn't the one. That wasn't me that done that to Jesus. It wasn't me that betrayed him. But Judas, are also known as Thaddeus. There wasn't a lot mentioned about him after his calling, and he was there in Acts and different times. But I feel like a lot of times God uses His Word to show us that, He calls these people, but a lot of times you don't hear their work, but yet they did work. There was work after the calling. And that's the way we are when we get saved. We may not be in the forefront of the history of New Center. We may not be in the big part of it and in there when some big things happen, but God is using us here as workers. And that's why we just got to keep working. Judas, he didn't give up. He still kept working. He still kept doing what Jesus had called him to do. And we can't lose sight of the prize, and that's working for Him. It's amazing that He allows us to do anything. It's amazing that God looks at me and sees all my faults and sees everything that I've ever done, and He allows me to even unlock the doors and turn on the lights, much less be able to pastor this church. And I'm sure that if you look back in your life, there's things that you look at and say, I don't know why in the world God would choose me, but He did. He chose you to be here. He chose you to be a servant at New Center Christian Church, and we need to serve with all of our heart. We don't need to serve half-heartedly. We don't need to come in and do things halfway. I don't need to come in and preach halfway. I don't need to come in and teach halfway. I need to be prayed up. You need to be prayed up. We all need to come in ready to serve. Judas was just faithful. Actually, Philip. Philip, he lived in Bethsaida. He later preached in Phrygia or Phrygia. He was martyred in Phrygia. Tradition says that he was buried in Hierapolis. All these words, man, I should have looked how to pronounce all these things. But Philip, he was the one that we talked about this Sunday. This was what our lesson was on. It was the feeding of the 5,000. And Philip was asked by Jesus where to get food. And he was asking him that because that's where Philip, the area that miracle took place was where Philip lived. So it would be like us when somebody comes to cigarette saying, hey, what's good to eat around here? Jamie said, nothing. And that's probably what Philip said. He said, well, there ain't a whole lot. What's this little bit of money we got? We ain't going to be able to buy much for this 5,000. But that we all know the story. That's where Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and fed the whole crowd. And there was 12 baskets of fragments left over after that. Philip saw this. All these men saw these things. They saw the miracles. Philip was also used in the calling of Nathaniel. He was or Bartholomew. You can remember that where he went and told him, he said, the one that Moses talked about, the one that Abraham and all that crowd's talked about down through the years. He's here. I found him. He's over here in the next town over. He's just right over the road here. But of course, Bartholomew or Nathaniel didn't believe him. And that's going to be who we talk about next, Nathaniel. He was from Canaan of Galilee. His work was, one tradition says he preached in India. Others say he ministered in Mesopotamia, Persia, Egypt, Armenia, Lycaonia, Phrygia, and on the shores of the Black Sea. He was killed, one tradition says, King Asirtus of Babylonian had him flayed and beheaded because the king's brother had been converted under Bartholomew's preaching. Sounds a whole lot like John the Baptist, how he didn't care who he was talking to. He didn't care what the king had to say. He got the king's, if tradition was right, he got the king's brother saved. He was a convert, and because of that, the king got mad. Nathaniel was the one who said, any good thing cannot come out of Nazareth. He was the one that doubted who he was from the beginning. When Philip asked him and told him about Jesus, and that the one that we've been prophesied about all these years, he's here. He doubted who he was until he got over there, and he said, I saw you. I saw you under the fig tree. I believe it was a fig tree. He said, I saw you sitting there, and because of that, he was a believer from then on. When God does big things in your life and can show you things, a lot of times it makes you, okay, I understand what you're trying to do now, God, but a lot of times God don't work that way. He lets us get in there and He lets us do something. He lets us be able to work, and then later on down the road we may look back and be able to see why He done what He done. But a lot of times you don't understand why you're going through the storm in this life. You don't understand why that you're going through the troubles that you may have to face. I don't understand why we've had to face some of the things that we had to face, but God does. And we just got to keep on keeping on. We can't give up. We can't step back. We can't sit down and say, well, you know what, somebody else will do it. Somebody else will take care of it. These 12 men minus Judas was all willing to go a little bit further. They was all willing to be there with Jesus. We should be willing to be there for God today. It's not anybody else's responsibility. It's ours. It's ours to stay faithful. It's ours to stay close to Him, to stay prayed up, to stay ready for whatever it is God's got in store for us. You know, I announced we're going to have revival coming up in May. We got to get busy. We got to get busy telling others. We got to get busy praying. You know, so that's a long time away. Imagine what God would do for us around here if we all was really serious about this thing and prayed for a revival. There's no telling how God could work. Next, we're going to talk about Matthew. Matthew, or also known as Levi, come out of Galilee. He was a tax collector. His only writings was the Gospel of Matthew. There is a strong consensus that he preached to his own people for nearly 2 decades. He is also associated with Ethiopians south of the Caspian Sea, Parthia, Macedonia, and Syria. Some sources say Matthew was martyred. Others say he died a natural death. But Matthew was a tax collector. He come out of a different cloth than some of the rest of the crowd. You know, I don't know whether y'all have ever done much fishing or went to a dock, but you know, a lot of times that crowd's they're not the cleanest. I'm not saying they're dirty, but they're not the most you look at in society and say, that's the crowd that I want to hang out with. Matthew come from that crowd. He come from the good crowd, if there was such thing as a good crowd as far as society was looking at it. But he was a crook. You know, most of those tax collectors that was used back in those days was scheming off the top. You say, all right, you know, you owe 20%, but 10 of it's going to be mine. But Jesus called Matthew out of that. God uses all kinds of people to carry His torch. You know, God doesn't care about your past. He saves you from that past, and He's able to use you through that past. Matthew could have said, well, you know what, I've stole from too many people. I've done too many things. And a lot of people probably had issues with Matthew because his friends, Matthew threw a party after Jesus called him, and they got mad. That's when they said, you know, they asked Jesus, why are you eating with this crowd? But we got to watch who we hang out with. When Matthew got saved, he changed who he hung out with. He went to walking with Jesus. He went to talking with Jesus. He went to following Him around. He didn't go back to that same crowd that Jesus had called him out of. We've got to stay away from that crowd. We can still be friends with them. We can still fellowship with them every once in a while. But you got to draw a line in the sand and say, all right, I'm going to serve the Lord. As for me and my house, we've got to be like Joshua. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Choose you this day. We got to choose. And sometimes that decision that we make is hard. It's tough to tell loved ones that you can't fellowship with them. It's hard to tell them, say, well, you know what, we just can't be hanging around each other no more, but we've got to do it. Because it may ruin our testimony if we ain't careful. Matthew didn't let them ruin his testimony. The next one was Thomas or Didymus. He come out of Galilee. Tradition says Thomas brought the gospel into India. He is said to have been killed with a spear. Later, his remains were taken to Edessa. Thomas was well known for the one that was doubting. When Jesus came back, when He rose from on the third day and came back, and Thomas wasn't there when Jesus appeared to him the first time, and he said, well, until I put my hands in his fingers in the holes and place my hand in the side where the spear was at, I'm not going to believe. Well, it wasn't long. He got to believe. He got to see with his own eyes. But some days we all wind up like Thomas. Some days we all have that doubt in our heart that God can do what he says he's going to do for us. We may pray a prayer and God says, okay, I'm going to take care of it for you. But then when he doesn't do it in our timetable, we start doubting. We start going back and saying, well, God, you've let me down. You've not done what you said you was going to do. My timetable is not God's timetable, and sometimes it's a good thing. You know, I go to thinking back about my life of how many times we tried to get in the chicken business, and how many times we tried to buy older farms, and how many times we tried to do this, and then we waited and just forgot about it. That's not even on my radar anymore. We go in a different direction, and the next thing you know, you get a phone call, hey, you want to build some chicken houses? And now we've got new chicken houses, and God's blessing us. And I go to thinking back, well, nothing saying about those older houses, but you hear the horror stories of how, I had to fix this, I've had to do all this, I've had to spend all this money, and how God used my impatientness and wanting to do something before it was his timetable. Just be patient and wait on the Lord. It's hard. It's hard telling people to have patience because I have none. I want things now, and I want it to happen. I want to go ahead and get it over with and start moving on to the next thing. But don't doubt God. If God tells you he's going to do something, he's going to do it. He's never lied to me yet. He's never lied to you yet. He's never not kept a promise that he's wrote down in this blessed book. Every one of them's either come to pass or will come to pass one day. You can mark that down. Next, we're going to talk about Simon. Simon the Zealot. He was from Galilee. He preached in Persia. Tradition says Simon was tortured and sawed in two for the cause of Christ. Many of these men could have said, you know what? They could have been like Peter was the first time and denied him and said, you know what? I'm not going that direction. You know, I'm sure it was hard after Jesus ascended into heaven. It's one thing when the master's there with you, when he's walking and talking with you, but then when he goes back to heaven, that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when it's time for you to be a big boy and say, okay, you've called me to this mission field, you've called me to this task, God, I'm going to do it. We don't never know what God's going to call us to do. God may be going to call some of you younger ones in here, maybe even some of you older ones. I don't know. He's not done with y'all yet either. But to the mission field. To me, that would be a hard pill to swallow. I can't imagine what these missionaries go through and how the struggle is that just to live by faith and how you're dependent on somebody else to send you everything that you have and everything that you need for that month. But God supplies their needs and God blesses their faithfulness, and you never know what kind of impact they're having on those people. You never know what kind of impact these men had on the other people of the countries that they went into and the ministries that they had. Lastly, tonight we're going to talk about Judas Iscariot. He was the son of Simon Iscariot. He come out of Kerioth of Judea. His work was he betrayed Jesus. You know, that's one thing that many of the gospel writers, they always remind you when they talk about that Judas. They say Judas Iscariot or Judas the one who betrayed Jesus. They always remind you of that. But Jesus knew he was the devil from the beginning. And yet he still called him. He still brought him into the fold. He still caused him to walk with him for that 3.5 years. Even though Jesus knew who he was and what he was going to do, he still walked with him. He still let him come. We all are going to have Judases in our lives. We're going to have people that are hard to deal with and are just that one that are the thorn in the flesh like Paul had. But we've got to deal with them. We've got to put that smile on. We've got to. They need to see something different in us. We're God's people. God saved us. God's put us on the right path. And the Judases in our life need to see that. It's hard. It is hard to live that life. I know people are going through stuff that it's hard to be that one that's always on the receiving end of unkindness. But we've got to be kind. We all have people around that we know that are bad news, but they need Jesus too. I don't know why. Jesus knew that the way it was going to turn out before it ever turned out. But maybe he put Judas in there to show us that, hey, you need to still live with those Judases. You need to live that life before them. You need to tell this lost and dying world what I've done for them. It gives us an example as to not to give up when bad people are around us, not to give up when there's that one in the crowd who's always trying to sow discord. We just got to keep on keeping on. We can't let the world get our joy or steal our joy. But a lot of times they don't do the stealing. We do the giving. We just hand it over to them. I can remember working at Canteen, and there was a few people that I just hated to see them come. I hated to see them come my way because chances are they was going to make me mad before they got done talking to me, because there was one, they was either going to accuse me of something I didn't do, not answering an email, or not taking care of things in a timely manner, or just be downright ugly. And we all have people like that in our life, but we've got to live it before them. If we lose it and get unruly with them, they ain't going to have a whole lot of faith in us when we tell them we're Christians. But if they see us living our life before them, if they see us speaking those kind words when everybody else is about not spitting on you. You know, you look at what Jesus had to go through and all the crowds and how they tried multiple times to belittle him and to get him to quit, or just to capture him and kill him before his time come. But he didn't give up. He kept going. He kept going from town to town. When one town got done with him, he moved on to the next one. Sometimes we have to move on. We have to move on past people that don't want to hear it. Maybe God will direct our paths together again one day, and we're able to fellowship or able to win that person over. But we just got to keep pressing towards the mark. We got to be like these 12, or at least these 11, who kept going. When Jesus went off the scene, you didn't read of them just quitting. Yes, some of them were killed shortly thereafter Jesus left this life and ascended into heaven. But they kept going, they kept working, and it's up to us as Christians to keep working. If New Center's going to stand for another 150 years, we got to keep pressing on. Because it can't end with us here at 151, 152 years. It can't stop, and that's where it all ends at. Because at 50 years in, there was people that was willing to still keep going. At 75, at 100, there was people that was willing to still keep going. Well, at 151 or 152, I can't remember where we're at, but we've got to still keep going. We've got to keep pressing towards that mark. We've got something to do. We've got doors to knock on. We've got people to tell. We've got people to invite. It's time for us to get busy. Father, I pray that you'd use this thought tonight. Lord, I pray, God, that you would help us, Lord, to be like these 12, Lord. Be like this 11, Lord, that was faithful. Lord, I pray, God, that you would help us. Lord, that you would help us to be good disciples here. Lord, I pray, God, that you would send us out into this lost and dying world. God, prepare us. Lord, I pray, God, that you give us the words that we need. Lord, I pray that you bless your people, God, for being faithful tonight. Lord, I pray that you'd touch those that are hurting in our church family. Lord, touch those that are sick and suffering. Lord, I pray, God, that you just might minister in a mighty way. Lord, I pray that you'd bring us all back out to your house this Lord's Day. God, I pray that we would worship you in one accord, Lord, and we just love you. We thank you for everything that you do for us. In Jesus' holy name I pray. Amen.